Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent with me, Gbenga Aborowa. This is the show where we bring you updates on security situations and happenings around the continent. But before we delve into today's show, let's bring you the latest security headlines. The United Nations has renewed its calls to maintain stability through a ceasefire in Libya. South Africa's Julius Malema appears in South African Magistrate Court. And Sweden announces early pullout of troops from Mali. And former International Criminal Court prosecutor Fatou Bensouda is to lead a team in violations during the conflict in Ethiopia. Don't go anywhere. I will be right back. Today on Secure the Continent, we will be looking at the food security in Africa. The continent is experiencing dwindling food production as a result of many factors, which include farmers not feeling safe to go to the farmland as a result of insecurity, and in some cases, climate change. We'll bring you more details in this package.
Across generations, the pursuit of food has led to the rise of communities. In the absence of adequate food and by extension, a reduced capacity to survive, human populations extend their search for food. This search oftentimes leads to conflict, particularly here in Africa. While food security is the measure of the availability of food and individuals' ability to access it, more than 800 million people live every day with hunger or food insecurity. Food insecurity is the state of being without reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. This is without doubt one of the biggest drivers of conflict in Africa. In the last 2 years, more than 100 million people have faced crisis, emergency, or catastrophic levels of food insecurity. In the last 1 year, food insecurity has risen by more than 60% in a continent filled with arable land and water bodies for irrigation farming. 9 of the 10 countries with the largest food insecurity on the continent are facing conflicts. In the Sahel, northeast Nigeria, Ethiopia, southwest and northwest Cameroon, and the Central African Republic, where conflicts have become a regular occurrence, the pursuit of food has become more difficult, dangerous, and critical. In some parts of the Central African region, notably Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Central African Republic, there is a deliberate blockade of food by rebels. For months, the Ethiopian government blocked trucks of food from gaining access to Tigray as the war raged on. In parts of northeast Nigeria, reports of farmers being taxed and worse, killed by terrorists, the fear of the unseen and unknown has kept farmers from their farms. Food insecurity is also causing many to take up arms and fend for a living, albeit criminally. It's devastating, and solutions have become imperative now more than ever.
Now, joining me and Secure the Continent this evening to discuss this and more, Azubike Nwokoye, he is the Food and Agriculture Program Coordinator, Action Aid Nigeria. I also have Chioma Okafor, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. She is a global health and development professional. And joining us later in the second half of the conversation is Dr. Koren, an assistant professor of political science at the Indiana University, Bloomington. A warm welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us on Secure the Continent.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start with you, Chioma. The 2021 State of Food Security Report of the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, says 21% of Africans are insecure. What is food insecurity?
Yeah, thank you, Gbenga. And again, thank you so much for having me today. I think when one hears food insecurity, a couple of words come to mind. One of those is hunger. We know that hunger, poverty, and disease are interlinked and are really a direct result of a lack of sustainable and accessible food supply. We also know that food security aligns closely with the first two of the 17 UN SDGs and is really considered a cornerstone of global health, national security, as well as development. While many people may not be hungry in the sense that they're suffering physical discomfort caused by a severe lack of dietary energy, they may still be food insecure. So the Food and Agriculture Organization has defined food insecurity as a lack of regular access to enough safe and nutritious food for normal growth and development to achieve a healthy lifestyle. And this really could be due to an unavailability of food, but also a lack of resources to obtain food. And of course, we're still in the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen the impact of the pandemic. Climate change and armed conflict are also on the rise, and this is really reversing years of development gains. So increasing also the number of people that are facing acute food insecurity. And really, as a public health professional, a key part of my work is studying the social determinants of health, which is the source of health inequities. And so food insecurity in the context of social determinants of health is also interconnected with population growth. It's interconnected with political instability. We're looking at economic development, urbanization, migration, agricultural policy, and environmental factors. So it's really a confluence of several factors that affect food insecurity.
Thank you, Chioma. Now, I would like to come to Azubike. Chioma did mention the interconnectedness of food insecurity. Now, not having enough to eat is indubitably a hair trigger for mass uprisings, the kind that we've seen in the course of history, which is, all the way back to the French Revolution. What is the interconnectedness of food systems and food security?
Now, when you look at the current food insecurity situation in Africa, you find out that 12 out of the 15 countries in Africa facing acute food insecurity are countries that are also experiencing conflict. So with conflict, it shows that with conflict, a lot of things are disrupted, farming is disrupted, people are not able to go to farm. Then Nigeria, you have banditry and other things. And you have also mentioned in your intro, countries like DRC. Currently, DRC has about 26.2 million people facing food insecurity, Ethiopia 16.8, Nigeria 12.8 million, South Sudan 7.2 million, Sudan about 6 million people, Somalia about 3.5 million people, Zimbabwe 3.4, Burkina Faso 2.8, and it goes on and so on. Mozambique 1.6 million people. So altogether within Africa, about 106 million Africans are faced with food insecurity, and apart from food insecurity, the attention they have also all paid to investing in the agriculture sector is also another challenge, because if you do low investment in the sector, you will also face the challenge of not having increased employment and increased food production also. So that is what we are currently faced with. And, with crisis, apart from having refugees, because even in terms of even buying food in bulk and mopping up to even do humanitarian assistance alone could cause price crisis in areas that are not experiencing conflict, because it means that maybe a humanitarian organization will come and mop in bulk. So it depends on the kind of situation and how it is handled. But it shows that all the countries facing food insecurity are all countries that are actually in conflict.
Okay. Thank you, Azubike. And now back to you, Chioma. Azubike just mentioned that 106 million Africans are currently facing food insecurity. That's quite a huge number. Now, what are some of the consequences of violent conflict on food reserves and food supplies? Because we've established the fact that, they go in tandem, insecurity and food insecurity.
Right. I think Azubike makes some really great points. We know that wars are inherently violent and harmful, but destruction of resources can cause more than just more harm, more than just bombs and bullets. We're talking about warring parties that can plunder their enemy's food supply. They could deliberately destroy farms, livestock, or other civilian infrastructure. We're seeing that happening in Ukraine. We've seen it happen in Ethiopia, and we're seeing it happening even in northeast Nigeria. We know that conflict also triggers the displacement of huge numbers of people, cutting them off from their food supplies and livelihood. And then these refugees are often vulnerable to acute food insecurity, so of course disease. And then food systems in these conflict-affected countries are often characterized by this high level of informality, there's structural weakness, and also vulnerability to shocks. So we really need to start looking at breaking the links between conflict and hunger and really harnessing the potential of food systems to contribute to peace, which really requires kind of a good contextual evidence that's well grounded in knowledge of the setting of the country, but also looking at how we can ensure this cooperation between peace, humanitarian, as well as development actors on a global level.
Thank you, Chioma. Azubike, this year marks the moment when the world's population will pass the 7 billion mark. It's the first time in recorded history that the number of people would have doubled in the span of one generation. What are the implications of this monumental event on food insecurity?
Do
we have the capacity to feed the number of human beings on Earth?
Yes. So we are not increasing our food production rates at the same level that the population is also growing. So it's going to be a very big challenge. Already, by the time you mix the conflict, drought, with even the current Russia invasion of Ukraine, it is going to actually be quite challenging. So all African countries need to double up their efforts, in terms of growing food. For instance, the African Union biannual review report, which has some certain indicators that African countries are supposed to report on how they are working on food security under the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. The result for between 2021 will be launched on the 10th of March. But the last score as at 2019 shows that many countries were not on track. It was only within Africa, it was only 3 countries, Rwanda, Morocco, and Mali. They had stayed on track in the first and second reporting cycle, and Ghana also improved in terms of being on track after the first one. And we have, so Nigeria was not also on track. So apart from the challenge of drought, that the Sahel is also facing, yes, and in some parts of West Africa and Nigeria, investment needs to be doubled up. Sustainable agriculture needs to be promoted massively. All the countries need to put minimum of 10% in the agriculture sector, with specific investments focusing in areas of extension services, processing facilities, labor-saving technology, access to cheap and easy credit, support to smallholder women farmers, and so on. Those critical areas, research and development, and youth in agriculture. The agriculture sector is one sector that can provide the highest number of employment that is needed, and it can solve a lot of our unemployment issues within Africa. So investment needs to go to the sector to ensure that food production is increased. And African countries will be better off because we'll have the comparative advantage in terms of what we can grow. We are endowed naturally across African countries.
It's quite shocking that even with all of this, we still struggle to feed ourselves. Now, Chioma, we understand that food insecurity is not only a consequence of violent conflict, it can also be a driver of food insecurity. Food insecurity is not only a consequence of violent conflict, but can be a driver of insecurity. How does this happen?
Yeah, thanks, Gbenga. I think the relationship between food insecurity and violent conflict, as well as the positive relationship between food security and stability, has really been a key question in both policy and academic circles for many years. It's well established that differences in food security, shape the short-term and long-term outcomes of health and well-being. And when individuals and nations are not able to cope with shocks and as well as earning income, and consumption is limited. So I think, therefore, governments really need to start acknowledging that access to food is a human right and start pursuing these preventative policies and take emergency measures to secure food equally for all parts of their populations. If said government lacks the capacity to prevent or mitigate a food crisis, then it's important for that government to allow and facilitate relief operations as that is demanded by humanitarian law. And I think Azubike brings up a point about the important role of women. And since it is International Women's History Month, I do want to point out that there's existing gender equalities that still abound in many countries facing food insecurity today. Women play an important role in food production, and they still face a lot of cultural barriers in many countries that are preventing them from achieving their full contribution in the quest to achieve
Sorry to interrupt you. What are some of these barriers that women are facing in these countries?
I mean, we could talk about, denied access to credit. And if we're seeing that 40% of women are engaged in agriculture, yet they're denied this access to credit, as well as basic information and knowledge about modern production technologies, it's really important that governments need to start instituting policies that address these issues at both state and national levels in order to reduce these inequities.
Thank you, Chioma. Now, back to you, Azubike. Now, at the time of the first protests of the Arab Spring in Tunisia and Egypt, bread prices had risen 30%. The Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations primary food and agriculture monitoring body, issued a release announcing global record highs for food prices and the 7th consecutive month of price increases. This was even before the current conflict in Ukraine. What happens when the price continues their trajectory? These are conditions for an unrest. I'm sure you would agree with me. So what are the implications of this to security on the continent? Because a lot of African countries do import wheat from Ukraine and Russia, which are currently involved in a conflict.
And it's looking tricky, but we are hoping that we are sure that the governments, especially in the Sahel, countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, and so on, we are sure that they are monitoring the situation in the sense that Egypt is one of the highest importers of wheat from Ukraine. And the challenge is that they are not only importing from Ukraine, many African countries are also importing from Russia itself. So I'm sure they will be doing something to ensure that, that they mitigate whatever is going to arise. I'm sure they might start doing price control or probably find other sources to import into their countries to avoid crisis. And the challenging part of it is that, like I mentioned earlier, many countries are already facing, food insecurity with a certain high number of their citizens in Africa facing food insecurity. So it means that they need to do something drastic. And I mean, for Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, and so on within that Sahel region, they are now faced with a kind of drought that they have not faced, that they have not experienced in the last 30 years. So to tell you how difficult it will be for them. So I'm sure they will work around alternatives, especially getting wheat into the country. And with what is happening, maize is also affected. Sunflower oil is also affected, yes, from the same Ukraine and Russia also. So I'm sure the government will be doing something drastic. But the truth about all this is that African governments have not done enough in terms of ensuring that they put the right investments in the agriculture sector. Many of the countries, except for 2 or 3, they are actually not at the point of being at a level that they can say that they are food secured, in the sense that they have not done what they needed to do. You know, areas of progress like halving poverty by 2025, intra-Africa trade, sustainable livelihood, and so on. Many of the African countries are not on track, except 1 or 2, with Rwanda taking the lead. So they need to do a lot of work. And it is also quite challenging by the time they have finished. I mean, African countries have signed the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, you know, and that is also going to bring its own dynamics, because it means that the EU and other areas will have more access to African agriculture markets. So it means that Africa might end up being a dumping ground, and it means that it can also affect our local production and consumption in terms of.
Azubike, sorry to button there. How can Africa be a dumping ground when we're not even we've not produced enough to feed ourselves?
No, why I'm saying dumping ground, I mean, is that Africa will be taking more imports, especially on commodities, yes, which Africa has comparative advantage. You know, if we are not producing enough, it means that, I mean, we will keep on importing. For instance, Nigeria alone, in terms of wheat, imports about 96.5% of its wheat need.
That's a high number.
Which is more than 250 billion naira, you know. So if Nigeria, and at a point, you would have also learned that as at early last year, they had to give some companies permission, approval to import maize into Nigeria in order to make up for the shortfall for poultry feed. So those are some of the signals that shows that we might have a lot of problem if we don't do something drastically in terms of the kind of investment we put in Africa.
Thank you very much, Azubike. Now, staying on the question of price increases, Chioma, and talking about doing something, how important is maize and wheat on the continent as a staple, and what can be done to mitigate some of the shocks in price increases? And what about storage? Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think Azubike has kind of addressed the importance of maize and wheat, but I think in terms of what can be done in Africa, we know that purchasing power, social safety nets are somewhat limited, and we are also seeing this discontent with underperforming governments kind of simmering. Current conditions, supply chain disruptions, climate shocks, spikes in commodity prices, lockdowns. We saw what happened during the EndSARS protest in Nigeria with the kind of the ravaging of the houses or storehouses for food. have really just created this fertile ground for unrest, right? So the informal sector as well in Africa has been ravaged by COVID-19. Fuel prices are rising. There's so much happening. So it's important for governments that are really lacking this fiscal space to mitigate this impact. So we need to start looking at some low-hanging fruit to mitigate these challenges. We need to start looking at stimulating productivity and investments in the food supply chain. And more importantly, I think something that is kind of a growing industry in Africa is the startup scene. We need to start looking at innovation along the food supply chain, which should be strongly incentivized and rewarded. Africa is home to many startups, and some of them are really at the forefront of developing climate resilient crops, creating high yield but sustainable agriculture, and also just looking at reimagining the food supply chain. Another thing that I wanted to point out here is that with these food shortages and food insecurity, another indicator that we need to start looking at in the growing population is global chronic undernutrition, which is really increasingly concentrated in conflict-affected countries. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen that the number of stunted children in conflict-affected countries have increased from about 97 million to 112 million. And let's keep in mind that Nigeria has the second highest rate of stunted children. So there's really important ramifications.
Is it the nutrition that is responsible for, what is responsible for having stunted growth in this
undernutrition, which is a part of food insecurity.
And
Right.
what causes it when they don't get enough food to eat?
So if children aren't getting the right amount of nutrients for their growth, then obviously they're growing, they start to develop stunted growth, and there's other health consequences of this as they're growing up into adulthood. And I think in general, when we start looking at food insecurity, like I mentioned earlier, it's really a confluence of different factors, and we need to start considering how this problem is going to affect our population. Africa has the youngest population right now, and we need to start looking at how these problems can be addressed in order to support the most vulnerable in our countries and, of course, on the continent.
And who should push for those reforms? Azubike did mention earlier that governments should dedicate about 10% of their national budget to agriculture. Should it be private sector driven? Should it be government driven? And how bad is the situation in Africa?
Okay.
Sorry, Azubike, that question is for Chioma. I'll come back to you shortly so you can respond. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a good question. It's everybody. I think that everyone has a role to play. Government needs to act fast. The government needs to collaborate with the private sector, needs to collaborate with other international actors like the UN or other humanitarian stakeholders. It's really a social, political, economic imperative to address this issue. So I think it requires a multi-pronged approach.
Thank you, Chioma. Azubike, the Farmers Association of Nigeria, they've complained that a lot of their members have not been able to farm. Some farmers have fled rural areas to move to cities because of the banditry and terrorism situation in northern Nigeria. What can be done in the alternative to restore, to return the farmers to the farms?
Okay, the federal government has come up with the farm rangers, under Civil Defense Corps, so that they can actually support in securing the farms. So government needs to step up that. They need to increase recruitment in that area, provide more training and ammunition on how to engage, and also ensure that they secure the farms. Government needs to be strategic. Government needs to actually be highly committed and show the political will and commitment by matching action with its words, And apart from that, there are other ways while we are waiting for security to be better in those areas. There are ways to practice agroecology, where the farmers can be supported trained to do home gardening or to increase what they produce in a particular land by doing sack farming, tire farming, and so on, but it has to be based on agroecology, because what has also continued to affect our agriculture system is that it is highly chemically based. We have even the issues of pesticide, but those issues will be issue for another day. The kind of pesticide that is affecting livelihoods here in Nigeria in terms of in the agriculture sector. So the farm rangers needs to be supported properly, trained properly, increase the number so that they can secure those areas, and also proper investment needs to be done in terms of area of ranching, so that, because one thing that is also happening apart from banditry, the farmer herders conflict is one of the challenges also that is being faced, and we have seen in situations whereby, I'm sure you guys must have seen some live videos and so on, whereby some herders who are bad who harvest cassavas from people's farm or yams and be feeding to their cattle.
And the
So a lot of things needs to be
farmer
done.
herder crisis is not just restricted to Nigeria only. It's across the Sahel. Yes.
Yes. So I'm giving you example, and those things are also further caused by climate change, because you notice that the farmer herders crisis will always increase during the dry season, because
Azubike,
they are moving towards where there are more fodder, where it's greener.
Okay, thank you, Azubike, and thank you, Chioma. This is a fine place to go on a break. I would like to say a very big thank you to you, Chioma Okafor, for joining us and sharing your insights with us on Secure the Continent. We do appreciate your contributions.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're watching Secure the Continent here on News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation on food insecurity and conflict in Africa towards nutrition and peace. Join us again. Hello, thanks for joining us. If you're just joining here on Secure the Continent, we have been discussing food security in Africa, and we've touched on some of the consequences of violent conflict and food reserves and food supplies. We have also discussed the drivers of food insecurity in Africa, and we will have joining us during the course of a program Dr. Koren, who is an assistant professor of political science at the Indiana University in Bloomington. Now, back to you, Azubike. At the time of the first protest of the Arab Spring in Tunisia, bread prices had risen 30%, and we do know that prices do increase as a result of conflict going on. What happens when prices continue to increase?
These are, it is because of situations like this that each country has government and has different ministries, agencies, and departments that should be proactive in mitigating this kind of issues. Now, you will notice that in Nigeria also, prices are increasing. You notice that prices are increasing, and at times, what you buy for 1,000, by the time you go to the market, if it is going to increase, for some time now, you are not likely to see an increase of 100 or 200 naira, but up to 500. So if the inflation rate is also high, and conflict is part of what is causing the problem. For instance, if you go to the Northeast, you find out that food supplied to Northeastern states are majorly coming from other Northeastern states like Gombe, Bauchi, which are not facing the insurgency. So you find out that the more we have conflict, the more prices will increase. So one is that governments need to, first of all, because even without conflict, drought or out of season can increase prices. So if a commodity is scarce, prices will increase. So we used to have in the past in Nigeria what we call guaranteed minimum price. In terms of farmers are sure of the market for a certain amount. It no longer exists also. And you find out that during COVID-19 pandemic, our national reserves, there were a lot of issues, including talking about expired rice that were distributed to states and so on. It means that we need to do a lot of work in terms of ensuring that our national reserves, are properly well done in terms of making sure that it is well stocked, and whatever is stored, the grains that are stored are also of quality and doesn't get spoiled. So we need to work on our national reserves. We need to work on guarantee minimum price to solve the issue of market access. We need to also do a lot of investment in terms of processing facilities. A recent data we gathered last year as ActionAid Nigeria to feed into the third biannual report for Nigeria shows that across the country, smallholder women farmers have access to only 18% processing facilities. That is quite small. And this is same country that annually we lose about 3.5 trillion naira from post-harvest losses. And we have only 18% access to processing facilities for smallholder women farmers. Storage facilities is at the rate of 16.60%, which is now up to 20%. Market access and off-takers is about 13.50%. Transportation is less than 10% in terms of access. Even training or handling post-harvest losses is about 42.30%. It's showing that we need to do a lot of work across Nigeria and across Africa in terms of being able to really, really achieve what we need to achieve. The screen is showing the dashboard of the last score of African countries, and you could find many African countries are in red in the sense that they are not meeting up to some certain indicators around halving poverty by 2025, and indicators about intra-African trade and so on, and public investment in agriculture, public financing of agriculture, which should be a minimum of 10% of annual budget annually. Currently, Nigeria's government 2022 agriculture budget is around 1.7%, and you could see how conflict has affected a lot of things.
Yes. Now, Azubike, there is significant agricultural trade between countries on the continent and Russia and Ukraine, where the conflict is currently raging. African countries imported agricultural products worth $4 billion from Russia in 2020. About 90% of this was wheat and 6% was sunflower. Azubike, what can African countries do to win itself off food imports, and what are some of the consequences of over-depending on imports?
Yeah, I have mentioned massive investment in the agriculture sector, but those investments should be targeted in particular areas that can give us quick wins. For places that are facing drought, we can no longer do agriculture to be seasonal. We need to invest a lot in irrigation, drip irrigation, so that we can farm all year round. For instance, for me, I think countries like Egypt is even making effort, because they have, despite the challenges they are facing, they have invested a lot in terms of irrigation farming. but they are still importing about 20 million tons of wheat, yearly. So they need to, in terms of African countries, we need to ensure that we address issues of climate change.
If wheat is such an important staple to Africa, why aren't we growing enough? And does it have to do with the climate or the topography or the type of soils? Because a huge amount of African countries are dependent on imports of wheat for such an important staple.
Yeah, the thing is, when we talk about in terms of dependence, African countries need to go back to the drawing board and do real investments. Because if you do an analysis of the countries importing wheat, you find out that some of them can produce this wheat also, but are they doing the right investment? Most times, no. Nigeria is also able to produce wheat, but we have not really decided to do a lot of investment in terms of increasing and sustaining our wheat production. For instance, even the wheat that we depend on, the wheat flour that we import, there was an alternative for cassava flour,
oh, yes.
And that policy came, bakers tried it, the cassava flour was good, but the truth is that government did not continue to sustain that policy by providing sustainable mechanisms and also supporting farmers to produce that high quality flour. So it also comes with, when I mentioned that the assessment we did for last year, that only 18% of smallholder women farmers have access to processing facility. It shows, so if they cannot actually process and have high quality cassava flour to supply to bakeries, that means the bakers will not adopt the flour because they also need a particular species and a particular quality also. So those are some of the challenges. So investments need to be done properly. Investments in processing facility, investment in storage facility, investment in terms of ensuring off-takers, guarantee minimum price for some certain produce if they cannot do all at the same time. And also timely investment. And the bad part of it, for instance, if I use Nigeria as an example, after the budgetary allocation, which is not even enough, there are no timely and total releases, especially for the capital component that is supposed to touch the life of citizens. Okay. So those things need to be improved. Government itself acknowledges that they are facing challenges, but you need to put your money where your mouth is. Agriculture sector is the sector that can employ a lot of people, including young people. And for instance, if the sector is claimed to employ, is estimated to employ about 70% of the population, and it is only statistically contributing about 21% of the GDP, then there's a problem, because it means that 70% of the workforce is only contributing around 20-something%. It should be far more than that, Okay. So a lot of work needs to be done in terms of the right investments in the area of extension services, in the area of supporting smallholder women farmers, having specific budget lines on access to credit. Recently, we said that the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and State Ministries of Agriculture should create a yearly budget line named Strengthening Access to Credit for Smallholder Women Farmers, so that they can use that, either get experts from their team or get consultancy firms that will help smallholder women farmers develop their proposals, the cooperative, develop their proposals, do their feasibility studies, negotiate credit with the bank, make sure there is moratorium, and make sure that every services that should come with credit comes with it. Services like extension services, market access, insurance.
Now,
And
finally,
even access to insurance
yes.
is not up to 5% across Nigeria in terms of agricultural insurance.
A lot needs to be done, as you've mentioned, throughout the course of the program to ensure food insecurity. But before I let you go, Azubike, does Africa have the potential to become a global food basket? And how can governments leverage on the opportunities presented by agro-technology, like you mentioned earlier, to address some of the continent's most pressing challenges when it comes to food insecurity?
Yes, African governments actually have the opportunity to become a food basket. Food basket in the sense that we are endowed, we are endowed in the sense that we can grow many things. We have comparative advantage across many things we are importing, so that African countries can actually do that by increasing their investment in agriculture, ensuring that 100% of the capital component of their budget is implemented. It is totally released on time and implemented totally also. So that in fact, we're even saying it might be very important for African governments to remove the agriculture budget from the normal budget cycle. They might do a different funding so that we don't miss anything in terms of agriculture, because agriculture shouldn't be seasonal. It should be all year round, because with irrigation and so on, and sustainable agriculture practices, agroecology and so on, can show that even on a small land, we can grow more food. We can grow many things that we are importing.
Quite a lot to be done, and we just need the political will and investments, as you've said. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Azubike Nwokoye, Food and Agriculture Program Coordinator for Action Aid Nigeria. I'd also like to thank Chioma Okafor for joining us earlier. Thank you for your time and contribution.
Thank you.
Now, the ultimate solution to food insecurity is food production, and farmers need to feel safe to go to their farmlands. African governments cannot stop trying to fix security challenges in their countries, as the ripple effect of insecurity is widespread and the absence of food makes it even worse. African governments must steer better collaborations with relevant agencies. Until next time on Secure the Continent, I'm Gbenga Aborowa. Thank you for joining us today on the show.